All right, I think we're live again on the interwebs. So I'm going to check in, make sure on my phone here I've seen a little LinkedIn bubble to make sure we're being seen. Not seeing anything yet on LinkedIn. So if somebody would please let me know if you can hear or see me. I feel lonely here. That will let me know that LinkedIn is live and it's working, and I don't have to kick it to get it to make sure people can see it. Yeah, buddy. All right, I can see it now. I can see it now. Awesome. So I wish there were a better indicator of that. So anybody from LinkedIn, if you're watching this, please give us a better LinkedIn indicator than to go on my phone to LinkedIn to find out if we are actually live. Would be phenomenal. So we do this every week. Jump online and I try and answer questions for people that are, hey, what's up, Anthony, Bobby, Barbara, appreciate it. Thank you so much for confirming that we're live. I like that. So every week I set aside up to an hour, maybe more in some other spots, but up to an hour to come on to LinkedIn and also simulcast this across the web on a bunch of other platforms and give folks some hope, as well as answers to questions that they might have about how do you go about landing that first gig as a software engineer or someone in the tech space. So my goal is to really just use some of my past experience as both a hiring manager and someone that's trained lots and lots of people and gotten folks into amazing software companies to give you that sort of leg up and answer to all the questions that you might have about, like, what is the strategy, what's the best approach to X, Y, and Z scenarios. So I love those. So if you have some, scenario-based questions, I'm not going to be like a Supreme Court person and try and like filibuster and dance around it. If you give me a scenario, I'll try and answer your question. And so Anthony, I see you say you have a question. Awesome. Go ahead and type it there. I'll do my best to try and answer it for you. I usually start by just letting folks know, use the comment box, and that's how you can get questions to me on any of the platforms. I think we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Periscope, apparently still a thing, and Twitch. So any of those places, you should be able to post comments, and I should be able to see them, and that's how we'll answer your questions. Usually also start off at the very beginning sharing my email address. So that's mike@sdcs.io. Mention that I do have a software apprenticeship program that's run out of San Diego. If you are interested in getting more information about that, just check out the website. That's sdcs.io. And there's absolutely no cost to attend the program. So we basically pay people to learn how to code. If you're interested in that, then head on over there. Also, we'll talk a little bit about sort of an issue this week that I thought was kind of important. Saw a couple of examples of, and then we'll just dive in and start answering questions. So if you have questions, again, no need to say you have questions. Just go ahead and put the questions in there, and I'm more than happy to answer them. So this week, I think it's really important to make sure that folks are staying positive in the face of what could be frightening and sometimes just absolute mayhem out in the streets, right? So I realize there's a global pandemic raging, and we've had wildfires, we've had floods, we've had all these other things happening in 2020, lots of people passing. But the optimism that can be reflected in just taking the day-to-day steps that are necessary for you to be successful will help. I guarantee that by staying positive, you will be able to add more value in your job search effort. By staying positive, you'll be able to sort of get through the numbers game that often is part of this process, which is you have to talk to a certain number of people and have a certain number of no's before you get to that yes. And someone says, I believe investing in you makes sense. We'd love to have you come on board and help you solve some of our problems and build some software for us and help us manage our products. And in exchange, they'll give you a little bit more runway for you to practice every day, getting better, and coding and getting paid for it, right? So gaining that level of experience, I think, super important. And it will come if you put the work in. So if you are getting down in the dumps, make sure you're putting the work in, but then try and be positive and try and have an attitude that is not one of this is a bunch of failures and you're getting like I like a lot of things when I'm cycling, right? So when I'm cycling and I'm climbing this hill, it's painful. But you have to remember it's painful for everybody. You're no different than anybody else. It's the same journey. Sometimes people go a little faster, they're a little stronger. That's all right. And it can feel bad when you get dropped from the pack. But at the end of the day, when you get dropped, that should be more for you to just say, let me push harder next time. Let me do some more prep next time. And at the end of the day, you get to the final destination. It just takes a little bit longer. So if you can be positive and you can tell your legs to shut up and you can keep going through the adversity, you're going to be perfectly fine. So that's my bit for this week. Stay positive. Like my man Justin Runfro says, stay positive. Now, this week, I got a few questions that came in already, and then a few that folks have already placed in here. So Alex says, how would you recommend dividing up time between networking, interviewing, job applications, and projects? Good question. So I have this percentages that I give, a breakdown of what I think is like pretty efficient, and it might work for you. It doesn't work for everybody, but I think you should probably spend about 20% of your time learning something new. So basically, if you've got a week and you want to do all of this one day at a time, fine, spend one day learning something new. I take the approach of it's better to kind of mix things up and keep some variety in your life. So 20% of your time learning something new might mean, again, just a few hours out of each day. Next, you should be researching and you should be reaching out and you should be trying to figure out who are great companies that you want to apply for. So doing that like research phase of the job search is super important. Don't skip that. Then you should spend about 40% of your time coding, right? So getting in there and working on passion projects and making sure you're adding to your portfolio and to your resume. And then finally, the last piece is the follow-up, right? So you've done some research, you've learned something new, and you've spent some time out there like making passion projects. You should be spending about the other 20%, that last remaining bit, continually following up with folks until they tell you to stop or they hire you, right? So it should be not a frantic pace of follow-up where you're sending them 3 messages every day, but the appropriate level of follow-up, which is don't allow it to go 3 weeks before you reach back out to someone and say, hey, I'd love to set up a time for us to talk. Did you get my resume, right? 3 weeks, way too long, right? Regular, frequent follow-up and persistence, because it may take a little while to get onto the radar of somebody that's a hiring manager. So scenario-based question from Anthony. Oops, sorry, it just popped up. I've worked in the gig economy and an app independent contractor. So big supporter of 22. Love it. And so from time to time, you are trying to apply to tech and marketing management in the field of social media, entertainment, music, creatives, etc. But you don't feel ready for the intricacy of interviews because you haven't worked full time. So how can you appeal to tech companies which have a high amount of user experience rather than a working experience over the last 3 years? Non-technical applicant willing to learn UI and UX design. All right, so it sounds like you want to be in a very specific space, which is cool. So you listed a few companies. So the companies that you listed are Spotify, Apple, Live Nation. Great. So got a goal. I think it's always important to have those top 10 companies that you'd really love to work for on your list, and then fill in the rest of your list with companies that share the same kinds of values or attributes so that it makes sense for you to be reaching out to those organizations as well. They should be in your sort of like sweet spot of these are the places that you really want to go work at. And so the most important thing that folks will say when I talk to hiring managers is they want to see real experience. And so when you're trying to appeal to tech companies, you want to have stuff to show, right? And so the more you can work on going onto Dribble and having a portfolio, the more you can work on having passion projects, things that show your actual level of skill, the easier it's going to be for you to have that conversation. For you to both tee up a conversation and have a phone screening or an interview, or get to somebody internally that could be a champion for you, or when you do get that opportunity and you're in on an interview, you can crush it because you'll be able to show them pieces that represent the type of work and the effort that you make to solve whatever the problems are. So I think everyone is going to acknowledge and recognize that for the first position, you're going to be a little rough around the edges, and you're not going to have all of the experience necessary for you to be a super productive, like just coming in and like cleaning up, right? And just like adding so much value that everybody's just like, dang, Anthony is just crushing it. That's not the expectation. The expectation that they have when they're hiring someone that's early career is you're going to come in, you're going to progressively get better, and they are going to get to a point where they've invested some time and some effort, and then there's a positive ROI, and you're actually beginning to deliver and add value to the business. But there's an acknowledgement that that doesn't happen overnight with folks that are in the earlier parts of your career. So try and put the work in and create that. One other way that you can validate when you're like, I'm not really sure if I'm ready, a way that you can validate that is reach out and see if you can find a mentor, someone in the space that can help validate where your skill level actually is right now. So I tell people early on when they're at like a coding boot camp or they're self-taught, they don't have a very good sense of where they are relative to where they should be. And that's natural because you have lots of questions as a newer person. You have a very small sample size. You've only potentially taught one person how to code. You've taught yourself, right? If you're going through a boot camp, it's like your first time through boot camp. So everything is kind of new, and it's hard for you to give your like a good objective and reasonable analysis of where you are in compared to where you should be potentially. But someone that is a mentor to you will be able to better like digest all of the information that you're providing and say, okay, this is more realistic. This is, you're right on course for where you should be. So Anthony, that's what I would look for. Spend more time working on passion projects, and then try and find a mentor that can help give you that better assessment of like, here's where you really are. And so I think you should go for it. You should be out there, you should be applying, and you should be seeing if you can get some of these positions. Don't worry about your like inner fear that like you're not ready for it, any of that imposter syndrome stuff. Try and validate with some real data. So Eric asks, any recommendations on how to get into robotics as a junior dev? Yes, robotics are awesome. So I like the idea of having things in the physical world. So the whole Internet of Things and robotics, awesome. And these days, there's way more than there used to be, right? So I'd say, even though it seems a little childish, is like start with some of the toys. Start with, maybe just things that will get you experimenting and like building. And they're, if you're an adult, hopefully fairly inexpensive. And it's an opportunity for you to start playing around and getting a feel for what it's like to work with like logic controllers and other physical types of devices, servos and things that you have to kind of figure out, like how do I transfer my skills in software engineering and scripting into how it presents with real interfaces with like voltage, positive and negative, right? It may also require you to expand into libraries and frameworks you haven't used before, in languages, right? So Python can be used as a language, C++, C#, and C could also be languages that you want to explore. So that's how I would inch into it and start with maybe just, again, you can buy these small hobbyist type kits or kits for kids and use that as sort of an entry to get comfortable. Then try and solve some real problems. See if you can figure out how to, wire up a lock for a door, right? Or something else that will get you discovering, okay, how do I get the Internet of Things kind of working? Raspberry Pi, great platform for this, especially if you add on top of it other kinds of devices like cameras. Then you can do computer vision, right? And you can start inching into that space. So inch in, have fun. I think it's a great way to, sort of, I think when people say robotics, there's a lot of different avenues to it. I think it's just a fun way to see a lot more of like your code in the real world in action. How's it going, Samita? Good to see you. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions coming through. I'm just scanning to see if I missed any because they came through in like chunks. So random LinkedIn user says, great to be here. I think so as well. So I'm glad to be here. Alex, hopefully I gave you a good answer to that question. All right, so I think I've answered all the questions there. I had a couple other questions that came through. Again, if you have questions, feel free to drop them into the comments, either on LinkedIn, Facebook, or on the Twitter is Periscope, I guess, and then Twitch, and I'll be sure to answer them. A couple that came through ahead of time. One was an individual basically has a lot of leadership on the resume. So been in the position of leadership and is now looking for an individual contributor role. So how does that on the resume, how does that work history reflect what HR managers are looking at? What should you do to make sure they don't say I'm overqualified? So I would suggest that when you're in a situation where you've got lots of previous experience, leverage that for a positive, and don't worry about it may look like a negative. I know lots of software engineers like to kind of vacillate between positions where they're in sort of a leadership role and then back to hands on the keyboard coding. So it's actually a little bit easier than some other spaces where once you have a lot of leadership experience, they don't envision you going back and being comfortable being an individual contributor. So I would discourage you from a fear and using that to sort of like cull and remove things from your resume. Instead, I would just focus on taking what's in your resume and amplifying those areas where you think that experience is going to make you a better individual contributor. And then frame sort of like any of the responses that you can have to like projects and things. Sometimes you can frame some of the narrative about what are some specific things that you learned or have done that will add to your value as an individual contributor. And then maybe you have a goal up at the top and you use the words like individual contributor or hands on keyboard. That's usually assigned to folks when you say, hey, my hands on the keyboard, technical manager, technical leader, right? Hands on the keyboard is that I'm not afraid to get in, roll up my sleeves and write some code. I'm excited to do that. If you can share that, and especially if you have an opportunity in a cover letter, that's awesome. That's going to get you beyond that discussion about, is this really what you want to do? Because I see that you've been in leadership for like 5-10 years. So nice, Eric. Already ordered a robotic kit. I love it. That's what I'm talking about. Taking action. Second question I had was, should I go after a certification for an entry-level role? I would say in many cases, it really depends on the unique type of role or jobs that you're going after. And in many cases, it may not be relevant or swing the pendulum in either direction in terms of like them being more or less inclined to make an offer to you and bring you on board. Now, there are some spaces where it's definitely helpful and maybe a requirement, maybe a prerequisite for a role. So examples of that might be if you are going after a network like support role, IT infrastructure, those kinds of roles may require that you've taken some certification exams. So if it's a Microsoft ecosystem, they may want you to be Microsoft Systems Engineer. So MSSE. No. It's MSCE, Certified Engineer. Yeah. So that's what it used to be. I've been certified since like 2000. It's weird to think back that in 2000, when I got certified for Windows 2000, I thought, this is amazing. Windows 2000, all those zeros. And so I got certified and I haven't used the certification since. I haven't used many of the skills since because it's just super duper technical. And if you're not going to be in a role where you're every single day managing infrastructure and setting up active domain and setting up domain controllers and configuring networks with permissions, if it's not going to be something you're going to do day to day, the test is overkill. Like you're going to have crazy knowledge that you're not really going to be able to apply. So I would say not a great investment of your time unless the job specifically says, Hey, this is going to be repairing hardware and we require an A+ certification. Great. Get the A+ certification. That way they know you've got that technical chops, but they're also going to want to see, can you break down and build up a PC, right? And if so, awesome. You're going to be great for the role. So a couple more questions came through. Should you code from scratch or alter a template to fit your needs? So I think one of the things you'll notice when you're starting to go out and like shop around for templates and things to start with is that the folks that make a lot of the starter templates are kind of gearing them towards folks that may not have a real deep knowledge. And what you'll find right away is that they're great for making small changes in many cases, but it can be really, really hard to make progress when you start with a template because of the directions and decisions that they may have already made for you. So I would suggest that if you are trying to get into software engineering, it's great to look at other people's templates, but don't take it as like gospel. More often than not, when you look at the way that they're constructed, they have horrible semantic HTML, right? So they may use like really terrible ID and class names or be constructed in a way where it's nearly impossible. You've got to do a lot of wrestling to make adjustments to the way something looks or the way that it performs. They may not be responsive, and you're just like, what was this person thinking? They didn't even start with a mobile first layout or design. So that said, sometimes you can find frameworks and libraries that are designed to speed up the process of getting you to build something big and faster. So an example of that is React. React is a front-end UI library. So it's a library or set of components that you can then use to implement front-end user interfaces. Bootstrap, right? Again, another good place to start, but you want to make sure that you're using something that's like one of those tools that's very, let's say, vanilla and gives you a good base to start with, versus when you go on to like a templating website and you're browsing pre-built templates, the results there are really going to widely vary. I think many of the times you'll spend more time wrestling with it than you do getting actual value and having it help you speed up the process. So beware. Templates sometimes feel like they're going to help you go faster, but it takes you much longer sometimes. So Andrew asked a really good question. Coming from the hiring side, what do you think should be the best things to look for in a potential candidate? I am always interested in looking at person's potential. Where's their ceiling? And sometimes you can tell really quickly if someone does not have a growth mindset and they have very limiting beliefs and they feel like this is kind of where I'm at and I don't really like new things and I don't really like challenges and I like to just get in and just do a lot of the work that I'm kind of familiar with. And once I get comfortable, I just want to do a lot of that same kind of work. If I hear that as a hiring manager, that role typically doesn't exist in most of the types of companies that I work at, where someone can just come in and do the same job every single day in software. That's not likely. But you'll see them. You'll see sometimes people that would be working for 30, 40 years in the same company doing a lot of the same work, and they're very comfortable and very competent in doing that work, but they really are not interested in learning every day and growing and getting better. So unless you have those kinds of roles, most hiring managers are looking for the opposite. They're looking to identify who's a candidate that is going to like rapidly like expand their knowledge, constantly learning, always wants to try something new. She's going to be someone that wants to follow through on the details of a project and wants to make sure they're doing really, really good on the things that require lots of diligence. If I can identify that in a candidate and say, she is the right hire for us, right? So keep in mind that every employer is not looking for the same thing. So some employers are really bad at hiring. And so some of them are trying to judge, can this candidate come in and make a very fast change? Can they hit the ground running and deliver a lot of code quickly? Those organizations usually aren't great organizations to work for because they're missing the big picture. They're missing quality, right? They're not thinking about, can this person come in and write defect-free code? Can we work at a fast, high pace because we're getting things done and not having to go back and retrace our steps for like bugs and introducing all kinds of problems into the code base? Can someone write clear and concise code? And some people will say, well, how do you test that without having the person write code? Well, you just talk to them. And if they can clearly articulate their thoughts, then they probably write pretty good code. If they can't clearly articulate their thoughts, so that's when we're just talking, then I have a hard time imagining that their code is well organized and easy to maintain, because it's probably the same way that they communicate. So I'm looking for how well can someone communicate. Do they seem like they collaborate well? And I might ask behavioral based questions to determine if the potential candidate is a emotionally intelligent person. Are they self-aware? Do they recognize mistakes that they've made in the past and how they could avoid them in the future, and ask questions along those lines? So I would say, Andrew, those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for when I'm screening a candidate. And I think a lot of other smart hiring managers look for those kinds of attributes. But you will be in interviews where you hear people asking for things that don't seem very relevant. That's a red flag. That's a sign for you as a candidate that this might not be the right spot for you. Even if they do seem like they're interested in making an offer, it may not be a great fit, especially for an early career folks where you need a lot of support and you want to be in a productive environment. So, Adrian, thanks for the question. Would you advise someone with no experience trying to decide if they would pursue front-end, back-end, or UX design? I think they're really different domains. And so when someone that has no experience is like on the fence and they're not sure, what I usually advise them to do is to just jump in and start and get a little bit of experience with both front-end work, with back-end work, and with user experience. So in user experience I think user experience is a domain that spreads across good software developers. They have a good sense of what does it mean to have like human-centered design where we're solving problems for people, making their lives easier, right? So I think getting a little bit of experience first is a better bet than saying, since you have no experience, I'm going to look at some behavioral attributes, or I'm going to look at some things that you might be interested in doing and prescribe that's where you will fit best and where you'll thrive. Because oftentimes students that I've taught at boot camps and have gone through immersive programs in a very short period of time completely change their thought process about what they thought that they would enjoy the most. So they might come in thinking they really like design and UX, and they really are not that interested in getting into the code because maybe they're a little scared that it just seems like overwhelming. And then very quickly, like, I really would like to do more of this like front end coding because I feel like I can like make my things come alive and I can actually build things rather than designing and having to hand it off and rely on somebody else. Or someone might come in and might say, I'm really bad at the front end stuff. And so I think I'm just going to stick on the back end because I've had a little bit of experience. And so inevitably, when they go through the front end portion of the curriculum, they're like, I kind of like this. It actually makes more sense. And I actually enjoy now being like a full stack developer. So I would say if you're not sure and you're trying to decide if you want to pursue one, the other, or the third option, try all three. Give yourself a little bit of time early on, because you'll usually find some balance of doing a little bit of front end, a little bit of back end, and also taking into consideration user experience. And then you will find one makes you happy, but it takes a little while. Then when you find the one that makes you happy, then you just double down and you go all in and you're like, this is the one that I absolutely want to do. So that may be sort of a long answer to that question of like how to advise them. I think the answer is like try. And then when you are starting to like, oh, this is exciting, I really like this portion, this is the part I enjoy doing the most, and this other part is the part I hate, then like this is the one for you. Then you can double down on training for that role. All right, so any other questions? They kind of slowed down a little bit, which is fine. Just means that I'm gonna get a lunch break today. So anybody else has any questions, I'll give you the little delay because I know it takes a little while for the questions to come through after I stop talking. There's like a little bit of a delay. And in that time, I'll just mention, if you're joining for the first time, I do this every Tuesday. So more than happy to stay for the full hour. If you have questions, if we end a little early, that's fine. It gives you more time to get heads down, do some coding, and make sure that you're advancing and getting your skills where they need to be, so that when you have that opportunity, you'll be able to take advantage of it. Theme for today was stay positive, like my boy Justin Renfro. Shout out to Justin. Any other questions? Going once. Going twice. All right, we're closing it out. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you again next week.